Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar called Transforming Fan Arrival from the First Point of Contactless. This is the second in our PACnet Premier Series. We're really excited to have a great panel with us today as well. Before we get started, I want to cover a couple quick housekeeping items to make sure you've got a great experience with us today. We've got hundreds of people on this webinar, so all of the attendees have been put into a listen-only mode. However, if you've got questions, that I'm sure you do, please type them into the Q&A panel at the lower part of your screen. There'll be time for questions. We'll get to every question that you have. So really excited about today's session and the panelists. We've got Chris Elliston, the SVP of Enterprise for ParkHub. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Craig.
And Mike Richey, who's the Executive Senior Associate AD of the Bulldog Club and Ticket Ops at Mississippi State. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good morning.
So the game plan for the day is we're just going to have a conversation and a discussion. This is a great continuance from our first webinar talking about contactless and digital ticketing. So contactless and that trend has expanded well beyond ticketing, as you all know. I also think it's interesting, and we were having some discussions around this prior to the webinar. If you think about the full fan experience, in some games, in some instances, for some donors, where they park is perhaps even more valuable than where they're sitting in the ticket. Now, Chris, please don't tweet that. But think about your valued donors, your valued season ticket holders. Perhaps they've been going to the game for 15 years. They sit and park and tailgate next to their friends they've been tailgating next to for 15 years. So parking is critical. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I'd like you to consider is from a technology and a customer journey and a customer experience, you know, ticketing is more than again, just contactless. Having the ability to do integrated digital parking also helps that customer journey. You know, the first thing someone might experience, we always talk about driveway to driveway, or what was that full game day experience? The first thing that someone might experience is parking at your venue or on campus or near your stadium. So that's critical. We want to enable technology, have a great fan and donor experience, and that's what we're going to kind of cover today. So to get started, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And guys, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit for a fun icebreaker. If you don't mind, please share your favorite live event experience. Chris, I'm starting with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig. And thanks for having us. Obviously, we enjoy a fantastic partnership with Paciolan, so always a pleasure to interact with you all. As you said, I'm Chris Elliston, I'm Senior Vice President at ParkHub. I wear many hats, and one of those hats is working with our strategic partners like Paciolan, making sure we have a really solid, tight integration, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a little bit. Mm-hmm. As far as best experience, this is actually fairly easy, I think, because I went to the University of Texas in Austin and made it to the 2006 National Championship game against USC. And it was one of those days where everything just kind of came together. We accidentally stayed at the team host hotel, so got to interact with the players and their families. The weather was perfect. Our tailgate was amazing. It was so good that Henry Winkler, the Fonz, came into our tent before the game because he heard how great our tailgate was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the game was obviously one of the best games of all time. Vince Young ran into the corner we were sitting for his last 2 touchdowns. My wife was pregnant. She made it through it. So all in all, it was a pretty amazing experience. And we flew home. We were the first plane back from LA back to Dallas, and we're wearing our UT garb and get off the plane. Everyone's cheering for us like we did something. It was just one of those things where it all kind of came together. And USC had won 2 championships in a row, going for 3. So yeah. It was quite a game. So tons of fun. Hard to beat that one.
That's amazing. Fun fact, I was at that game. That was an amazing game. Yeah, for sure. Mike.
Well, thanks. Yeah, again, appreciate you having me today. This is great. I'm glad to be here. Mike Richey, I'm with Mississippi State, and as you mentioned, in Bulldog Club and ticket operations. So day to day, I oversee the internal operations here in the Bulldog Club and also the ticket office. We're set up a little differently than a lot of schools in that I get to oversee development and ticketing. So that's a little different than a lot of places, but it works really well here for us. I've been here 20 years, so I've seen a lot of great live events, not just here at Mississippi State, but before here, I was at Oklahoma State for a few years and James Madison University for a few years. Went to school at UNC Charlotte, did my grad school at Appalachian State. So I've been around to a lot of great programs and seen a lot of great games. That's a hard question to answer, but I would have to say that our semifinal, Final Four win against UConn several years ago down in Dallas would probably be at the top of my list. You know, I don't know how many people know this, but the year before we played in a regional against UConn up in Connecticut, and that they beat us by like 7,000 points. So then to turn around the next year and play them in the Final Four and actually beat them, Morgan Williams hit that buzzer beater and knocked them out, ended their streak, and that was really a phenomenal game for us in a lot of ways. Something I had my 3 of my kids with me and got to experience that with them. The elation of hitting that shot and winning that game, especially after the year before, and watching our team celebrate and knowing what they had accomplished. And we lived that night, I mean, really celebrating, and then had to figure out how to get all the tickets for all of our fans that were making that trip to come over and watch the national championship game against South Carolina, which was also a great adventure, trying to figure that out for the next game. But I would have to put that at the top of my list.
Mike, you made me think of one of my memories. Thanks for that. Going back to our last big economic challenge in 2008, 2009, my beloved Michigan State Spartans made a Final Four run, and no one predicted that. And the Final Four was in Detroit, and it was a rallying cry for the state, because in 2008, Michigan was on hard times, and Detroit was on hard times. And Michigan State went to the Final Four. They played UConn. I took my family, my brother and my parents who still live there. And I'll never forget, Darrell Summers jumps over this massive UConn guy who's just this mountain of a man and dunked on him. We're all high-fiving, going crazy. But to bring it back to parking, Chris, one thing that would have elevated my experience is we parked very far away and had to walk downtown Detroit to this parking with my parents after the game. It was a little suspect, I got to tell you, 2008. So parking would have definitely elevated my experience there. But thanks for sharing, guys. That's awesome. So let's dive into the questions again. Audience members, if you've got a question for Mike or Chris or just in general, please type into the Q&A tab, and we'll make this interactive. So Chris, I'm going to start with you. So obviously we have an integration. There's over 30 plus clients on the Paciolan community that are integrated with ParkHub on digital parking. But at a higher level, you're operating beyond the Paciolan community. You're seeing all live events, all live entertainment, and some really big venues, some really big events. So I'd love to hear, Chris, your perspective. What are you seeing as a trend out there in the industry? And what do you think how is digital parking or parking in general helping the customer journey?
For sure. And I'm sorry we weren't around in 2008. We would have helped you at that event. No, so parking has had a tough year, right? So if you go back to kind of mid-March, right before the real shutdown, between mid-March and end of April, we saw a 90% decline in parking transactions. 90, so very, very close to 100. And that includes both, transient parking, daily parking, office parking, event parking, et cetera. We've since recovered a little bit. We're now at about 60% from where we were in March. So it's trending at least somewhat in the right direction. So it's kind of a weird L graph right now. Yeah. I suspect we'll see a hockey stick, growth here at some point, next year. But what's happening is, for the folks that are parking, we're seeing kind of two things. One is on the payment side, where folks are getting out of cash as fast as possible. So it's a mad dash out of cash, because cash is inherently dirty. It's got bacteria on it, something like 5,000 forms of bacteria on every single US banknote. So that's logical to get out of it, I know. Secondly is, it can go missing occasionally, either on accident or on purpose. And 3, there's no data behind a cash transaction. So as we move into more of a data-driven, digitized world, cash is becoming obsolete. So right now with ParkHub, it's something like 60% of transactions this year have been cash, 40% non-cash. I suspect that's going to more than flip next year to probably more of an 80-20, 90-10 type model when you consider prepaid parking, and digital forms of payment and all that. So cash is one thing. So the payment types are changing very quickly. MasterCard announced that they're now over 51% of NFC payments amongst their clientele. So we're seeing NFC, take off pretty quickly. Then the other piece is the prepaid pass side, where Paciolan comes in. Whether it's a season pass, historically it's been you get your season pass in the mail, and that's kind of the extent of parking. You might be able to drive up and pay cash in some places or not. This has kind of been a sort of a stodgy kind of world. We now can offer prepaid passes to both season ticket holders as well as day of guests. So I can buy a prepaid pass through Paciolan system, whether it's the day before, the morning of, or 5 minutes before. We can scan, authenticate, that pass. So that's becoming a huge part of our business. Thanks to the integration between ParkHub and Paciolan, we can do that and do it, seamlessly.
Right.
We're also seeing people get kind of creative in how they display that pass. Obviously, Craig, you can have multiple colors of that pass. So from a visual enforcement standpoint, for law enforcement, for example, I can display a maroon, parking pass to get into the lot, which helps with flow. We have some customers that are putting the season pass on the inside of their windshield as kind of a window cling. So the barcode's on the inside of the car. We scan the code from the outside of the car. So it's a true frictionless, contactless type of entry. And the final thing that we're seeing is more use of personal cars. I think there's a reluctance right now to get into someone else's car, whether it's an Uber, it's a Lyft, it's mass transit, whatever it is. We're seeing a big uptick in personal car use. I suspect that'll be the trend here for some period of time.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Good call on all those trends. I really like the color coding aspect too. I know, for example, Colorado State also does a color-coded banner in their digital parking pass that denotes if they're in the blue lot or the purple lot, so the attendee can quickly identify. So some good opportunities and trending there as well. Great, thanks, Chris.
Sure.
So Mike, obviously this is a tumultuous year. Can you give us some context as to what was happening on campus when you're getting prepared to come back for football season?
Yeah, we're like everybody else, I suspect, getting ready for football season. When we were in the early part of the spring, we were going through a renewal period. We had hired a new coach. Had a lot of excitement around the program with Coach Leach, and so our renewals were through the roof. Our percentages were really high. We were expecting sales that we hadn't seen in a long time. New sales were going really well. We really hadn't even started to market to new customers yet, and we were seeing a pretty high number of new sales. So we were in a really good position. We were right maybe 2 weeks before our priority deadline when everything started to shut down. So, we went from 0 to 90 and then 90 to 0, kind of like everybody else did. And then we were in sort of that unknown period where we really, I think, like most people, assumed that from March to August, things would kind of be back to normal and we would endure whatever happened with the NCAA tournament and the baseball season. And then by the time football came around, we'd be back in football stadiums watching football games like normal. And so there were a lot of unknowns, but I think we all thought that we would make it through the summer and everything would be normal. And the longer it drug out and the more we started hearing rumors and hey, we might not have a normal football season. And then it went from, hey, we might not have a normal football season to, wow, we may not have a football season at all. And everything kind of was on hold for a long period of time. And then there were a lot of assumptions being made and still a lot of unknowns. And there was sort of a hurry up and wait to all of a sudden hurry up and go. And so, you're trying to make all these last minute decisions about how the season was going to work. And really a lot of those decisions were made 4, 5 weeks, in some cases 3 weeks before the first game. Yeah. And so to have to pivot and make those decisions in such a short window of time really became difficult for everybody. And so, having the flexibility to make those decisions at the last minute, really became critical for us, as I'm sure they did for everybody else. And in the traditional way, where 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you had to allocate everything and send everything on a print file to some place like a WWNL to print everything that you're going to have delivered to your customers, whether it's ticket stock or traditional parking passes or or whatever. And, we tried to prepare as best as we could. So we ordered a bunch of thermal hang tags to print, and, we tried to prepare however we could. But when you're making decisions about where people are going to park and how you're going to sell your parking passes and how you're going to sell public parking lots and all those types of things 3 weeks before the first game, when you really don't even know who all your opponents are going to be, and we're printing things with TBA opponents and TBA dates and
Right.
and all those types of things, just to be able to be flexible and deliver things electronically and deliver things to mobile devices and print at home and all those different types of methods, I think was really more important in this year than we could have ever possibly imagined. And so I just think being able to make those decisions was critical for us, for sure.
Well, thanks for blazing the trail and leading the charge, and other conferences got on board, and hallelujah, all the Power Five are playing football and many others too. It's not without challenge, but it's great to on Saturday be watching football this year when earlier we didn't know what was going to happen. So dovetailing off of that thought, Mike, and obviously there was some timing challenges and there was some uncertainty and ambiguity. So how'd you change and adjust your parking strategy to accommodate some of those challenges?
Well, I think the first thing we did is, we looked at a lot of different options for how we were going to locate people. We talked about, do we want to change their parking assignment to match kind of where they sit in the stadium? But to your point earlier, a lot of people are more emotional about where they park than about where they sit. They tailgate with the same people, they tailgate in the same spot under the same tree that they've been tailgating under for 35 years.
Yeah.
And our campus, unlike, or very much like a lot of other campuses, we're not allowing tailgating this year, but we didn't want to detach them any more than they felt like they'd already been detached. So we did not want to move their parking. The other thing is we felt like if we left them in their same parking places, then that would help us with distancing. And we didn't want to go so far as a lot of stadiums where we told them, leave a spot between you and the next car. But we felt like if our capacity inside the stadium had been reduced to a certain degree, and we were at 25%, like a lot of schools were, that the parking lots were naturally going to be at about 25% as well. So we left everybody in their same parking spaces, in their same lots. We delivered passes electronically. We did it print at home because, our attendants and our parking folks felt like it was important to have something to leave on the dashboard. We have fans who are naturally inclined to be suspicious and feel like there's always somebody slipping a $20 bill to the attendant to get in the lot they need to get in. So if they don't see that pass stuck on the dashboard or hanging from the rearview mirror, then they are sure that somebody is getting into a spot that they don't need to be getting into. So we went ahead and even though mobile delivery would be much more efficient and better, we did go ahead and do print at home. So we did deliver that way that they can still scan the print at home pass and leave it on their dashboard. We did deliver that way, and we left them in their original lots. The only exception that we made was we pulled all of our public parking, which is usually remote. We pulled those lots on north side and south side of campus closer into the stadium because we knew we were going to have a problem with transit. So we didn't want to have buses that were half full trying to pull people in. So we didn't have buses running. We pulled those lots, public lots, closer in. So we took 2 lots and we either relocated people to a closer lot and made their lot a public lot, or in the case of the north side of campus, we had a lot that holds about 600 cars. We had only allocated about 150 cars in there, and we felt like we had enough space in there that we could sell public passes into that. So those are the only 2 changes that we made. Everybody else stayed in their regular lot, and we have enough space in all those areas that we could get everybody in. And again, just not having to really make any major changes, and people still knowing how to get to where they need to go.
Yeah.
Getting their passes and knowing exactly how to manage it, I think was very helpful. And really the less change, the better. And all the changes that needed to happen took place on our end in the back office. And there were things that we could do pretty quickly and efficiently.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. And so you talked about change and kind of minimizing the change. I'll throw this to you, but Chris, you probably have seen this across more institutions. So, fans don't like change. Do you feel like this year, given the extenuating circumstances, that they're more apt to adopt a change this year? And have you seen compelling reasons to get people to accept these changes?
I think so. I think Mike could probably speak better to the sort of the end fan, but what we're seeing on our side is that our customers are much more open-minded than they were probably before, because they want to promote and deliver a safe parking experience, right? Because it's one thing to have a safe experience inside the venue. It's another to have a safe experience outside the venue in the parking lot, which is the first touch point
Right.
for that guest. So it's important for them from a marketing standpoint and really a practicality standpoint to have a good solution in place. There's also a bit of a liability issue potentially. We don't know yet, but if someone has, comes across someone that has the virus or some sort of back and forth exchange that might lead to something bad, then there might be some liability there as well. So there's a legal reason too. People are justifying kind of going to this type of system. But I think certainly, parking is a weird industry, and it's been a very stodgy. My analogy is it's a big aircraft carrier, and it just takes a long time to turn the aircraft carrier.
Mhm.
The aircraft carriers turned very quickly in the last 3 years, more so than has changed in the last or turned in the last 100 years. So I think there's definitely been this movement, even pre-COVID, to get into more of a contactless, entry style, and then just COVID's really accelerated that. So I believe our customers are much more open-minded than they were before. College football is a very unique beast, and they're probably the last ones to want to say, "Hey, please change my entire day in terms of how I, when I leave my house and how I park and where I park and all that." But even college football has made that kind of quantum leap here in the last few months. So we're seeing it on the customer side for sure.
Great. Your aircraft carrier analogy reminds me, I was also fortunate enough to participate and see a basketball game on an aircraft carrier, which was really neat. And pulling that forward to this year, during the timeouts, there was no crowd noise. It was just dead silent. So, now we're all pumping in crowd noise and doing all these things. So there's some unique analogies there. Mike, any thoughts on change and communicating? You've got an amazing marketing team with Leah Beasley and her team. Any thoughts on managing or mitigating change?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that our fans have spent enough time over the summer watching Major League Baseball games and NBA games with no fans at all. So when they saw the opportunity to come to games at any level whatsoever, I think they knew that there was going to be a sufficient amount of change in the game day experience. Mm-hmm. So they've been better than I expected. Our fans support us at a pretty high level. So they've been really good. I think they know that next year is things are going to be back to normal, and that they're willing to endure a year that's pretty substantially different than what they normally expect, and they've been pretty tolerant of that. So I think a lot of credit goes to them on this. I expect if some of these things that we've changed temporarily, that we slide it in on them and make it permanent, then I think we'll hear some things next year that we haven't heard this year, that we'll have to kind of work through with them. Some of these, cashless transactions that stay cashless, and some of these touchless things that stay touchless. I think it's going to take a while for them to get used to that on a permanent basis. The other thing is only 25% of our fans are here. So we got 75% of them that aren't experiencing this.
Yeah.
So those are the ones I think we're going to have to spend some time educating on how things are starting to work in sort of a new world. And that'll be kind of a challenge for us to make sure that we realize that a lot of our fans aren't experiencing this, and it'll be a first time for them experiencing it next year.
Yeah, great point. The multi-year impact on not only the process, but also the communications as well. So Chris, back to you. Talked about the value of integration. So obviously Paciolan ParkHub has an integration. You're working with other technologies as well, and we're doing APIs, so it's more seamless. In fact, earlier this year, we are with our integration now enabling transfers and easier resale, and just the liquidity of a ticket has become more enhanced. So can you talk to us about what that looks like from your perspective? What are the benefits of that, and how you see that going forward?
For sure. I mean, I think having an API-driven system is really the key to a number of different things in the parking space. You can't be a closed-off system and expect to work with multiple customers. It just doesn't happen. So with Paciolan, for example, we started, I guess, Craig, 3 years ago. And day one, it was still an offline type of integration where a customer had to cut off parking sales the day before, the morning of, whatever it was. We could download the passes offline and then had them ready. Now we fast forward a few years, it's a real-time integration, meaning that we can handle last second transfers, day of purchases. I mean, our servers are pinging each other every so many seconds, so we can handle those last minute purchases or transfers. So it's key. And so for the fan that has a Paciolan ticket, to be able to have a parking pass the same way is fantastic. And so we'll get better at this all the time. I'm sure there's different ways we can go with this down the road. There are other reservation systems that you mentioned that we do integrate with as well. So this whole customer journey, which really starts with the parking side of things, is more streamlined than it was before. And then we've got you mentioned how many schools we're working with, and that list keeps growing. I think everyone has sort of moved into this more digital style of parking, scanning passes. Our handheld device, scans that pass. The person's name appears on the device, so the parking attendant can greet the guest as they arrive at the lot. So kind of a nice touch point between the attendant and the guest, and there's just a lot more intimacy to it, and we can track who's coming and who's not. It's meant more revenue for our customers as well, because they can now do what we call inventory management to figure out, okay, if Chris Elliston has 2 passes to this game, how often does he use that second pass? Well, if he goes with his family, and then he's probably not using that second pass that often. Well, they didn't know the history of that or the data behind that until now. Now they can see that, hey, Chris uses that second pass 2.7% of the time. I can probably sell more parking in that particular lot, which means more revenue, for the customer. So we just get smarter and smarter all the time. It's all about analytics. It's all about, we'll all get replaced by robots at some point, but right now it's about analyzing the data and figuring out how we can maximize the data. And prepaid passes helps us do that a lot.
Yeah, I love it. We're seeing that on the Paciolan side as well. The identity of the anonymous fan, right, from transfer or resale before, if you bought, I went to the game, I took Mike and Chris and another buddy, they only knew me. And now if I transfer that ticket to you in your mobile phone, we know everyone that goes in. So that creates some opportunity. Same thing on the parking side. I love your analogy there of yield opportunity with parking, knowing how often they get used or who's the recipient of that parking pass too, which is great.
There's actually a big, so one last point on that is that, sometimes if the person that has the game ticket is different than the person that has the parking pass, the school's not capturing that other piece of data who has that parking pass. So that person can now become part of their CRM or their database that they want to track. Maybe that person is a candidate for a mini plan or a full season ticket package. So kind of capturing both ends of that spectrum, game ticket holder, parking pass holder, is advantageous for the customer for sure.
Absolutely. Love it. Love it. Okay, Mike, over to you. So, you definitely made, you mitigated changes. There's some changes. You brought some public parking closer to the stadium. So, and there was a lot of fluidity, right, this year. So was there any aha moments or things that you uncovered through this process that you could share with others?
Most of what we discovered, I think we were fortunate to discover last year or maybe over the last 2 years. We started scanning our passes with Chris's devices 2 years ago. That first year we did them, we used our traditional season-long hang tag, and realized that we weren't really maximizing what we could do with those devices with that season-long hang tag. And so then last year we did the sheet of hang tags for each individual game, but we made the mistake of not setting it up as a combo item in the system, so it couldn't be transferred still. It had the same barcode for every home game. Good point. So we still really weren't maximizing what we could do. So we wanted to make sure that we set up the parking as a combo item this year so that it could be transferred around just like a regular season ticket. So, I think kind of learning those types of lessons leading up to this season was very helpful. I think the other thing we've learned, you mentioned how much people don't like change. I think the other thing we've learned is we've got to deal with even people on our own staff that really don't like change all that much. You got to work through that with some folks. You've also got to, I think this season more so than any other, having to explain to people on your staff that things don't always work the way they think that they work. what do you mean they can't do this? What do you mean they can't do that? You know, you kind of have to pump the brakes a little bit and explain, well, this is how that works, and this is how that works, and this is how they have to do this. You know, when you sit down in April and May and explain, okay, we're going to go mobile here and we're going to go print it home there, and they're not going to get a hard ticket in the mail. They're not going to get a hang tag in the mail. They're not going to get what they normally get. Everybody nods their head. Yeah. But then when, you know, that high-end donor that gives $1 million a year, when they call that development officer in August and say, okay, when am I getting my tickets? And, you know, you have to say, look, we talked about this back in July. They're not getting tickets. They're not getting a parking pass. They're not getting that stuff this year. What do you mean? What do you mean? They always get ticket. They always get a hang tag. When are they going to get their hang tag? They're not getting a hang tag. You know, you kind of have to revisit those conversations over and over. You know, so you kind of have some people on your own team that are a little bit resistant to those things too. So you kind of have to make sure everybody's all on the same page. And I think those are important moments as well, to make sure that everybody can explain that process. So I think it's important to acknowledge those things too.
Yeah, great point. The change inside and outside is something that needs to get managed. So I think we're going to go to our first interactive polling question right now. So if we could spin that up, and that is, got cash usage for options for fans. What is your team or venue's cash usage for fans for ticketing, parking, or concessions? Are you going cash only operations? Are you taking cash but planning to go cashless in the next 12 months? Is there a hybrid? Are you encouraging cashless but also accepting cash? Or are you going completely cashless operations? We'll give everyone an opportunity to answer, then we'll share results. So what's your team or venue's cash usage for fans for ticketing, parking, or concessions? Cash only operations, taking cash but planning on going cashless in the next 12 months, and hybrid of encouraging cashless but also accepting cash, or completely cashless operations. We'll close that out in just a few minutes and share results. Okay, a resounding 71% are doing hybrid, encouraging cashless, but also accepting cash. So Mike, you talked about the future and how things might go in the future as well. Cash only operations, 0%. So that probably has changed. I think historically there was some cash only. 10% planning to go cashless in the next 12 months. That's interesting. I'm assuming that's a pivot. And there's already 18% that are completely cashless operations. So good stuff, good insight. Thank you for participating in the poll. Okay, so I'm gonna throw this out to both of you, Chris and Mike. One of you can tackle it, and the other one can jump on. So as a community, we already approached football, and we were talking about this, you know, some semblance of normalcy for football. There's football on Saturday. That's amazing. So, you know, there's not without challenges, but we've already tackled football, and there's been success there, obviously. So is there anything unique or anything that you're contemplating for indoor venues or basketball or other sports? Mike, I'm gonna start with you, and then Chris, maybe you can look at it from an industry perspective.
You know, I think the harder part for at least I can speak to basketball at this point. I'm scared to talk about baseball because I'm afraid I'll have a stroke talking about baseball. But you know, just basketball. You know, just the idea of moving indoors, I think, puts a whole new dimension on all this.
Yeah.
You know, it changes the masking requirement a little bit, and I think our fans are a little bit. It, you know, changes their mentality when you start changing masking requirements. I think the other part of it is, you know, our television partners and our league have asked us to you know, have a buffer around, you know, their staff that's going to be in here. So, you know, it changes your seating manifest a little bit, having a buffer around the talent and having a buffer around camera operators and things like that. And those things are things, again, that are happening late in the game and kind of change your approach. I think too, you know, you come back to a sport that has more events, so that that changes how many people are going to transfer tickets, which changes how many people you expect to have a season reserve parking pass. So that changes where your public parking is going to be.
Good point.
You know, our basketball arena is right in the middle of campus, plopped down in the middle of a commuter and residential student parking lot.
Mhm.
So that changes how we have to manage our game day parking. We have to manage it differently for a 6 p.m. game than we do for an 8 p.m. game.
Mhm.
We have to manage it differently for a weeknight game than we do for a weekend game. So, you know, all of those things are going to play into our approach for how we manage the outside of the arena, which is completely different than how we manage the inside of the arena. But again, the technology that we have working with ParkHub and working with Paciolan give us the flexibility to pivot quickly and change all those things on the fly, which I think is going to be even more important for basketball than it was for football. But I just think all of those things that we're getting last minute guidance on is going to be very important.
Yeah, can't wait to see it unfold. Chris, your thoughts at a wider trend across the industry?
Mike hit on some key points. I mentioned earlier just kind of what we're seeing in terms of the payment side of the business and passes. We're also seeing a couple new nuances. One would be, and Mike actually touched on this earlier, is parking people closer to their entry point.
Mhm.
So aligning that as best you can. It's a little easier to do sometimes in basketball and baseball than you can with football.
Mhm.
But if I can park the person as close to their entry point as possible, there's less of that kind of cross contamination, intermingling, and so forth that happens, you know, on a game day. And we also are seeing a move to digital receipts. We provide printers with our devices, and people use those receipts for different reasons. But we're seeing a big push to not have receipts at all. It's just one less thing that the attendant's touching to hand to somebody else. And we tried it out with the Dallas Cowboys this year, and you know they're having 20,000+ fans. So it's a pretty good sample size. And we saw less than 1% redemption rate on the receipts. People given the option to get a receipt or not, they said no. They could have scanned the code, they could have requested the receipt, and they didn't. So I think there's maybe less need to have that physical parking receipt, unless a school or a team is using it for marketing purposes, or they're selling sponsorships or doing something else. The actual need to have the actual receipt, we don't see it being that big a deal going forward.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So Mike, back to you. So, you know, we're looking to get back to some semblance of normalcy. What's next for you, Mississippi State, for the fan experience? Anything else you're thinking about for the future?
You know, I think, and I guess this sort of ties back a little bit to basketball, maybe more so than football, or at least basketball and baseball. We're like every college campus, even though we're more rural than a lot. You know, parking is an issue for us everywhere, day to day, not just for athletics, but day to day on campus in general. So we're starting to see there's one garage under construction. There's another garage that's on the planning,
Right.
you know, for our campus. So, you know, more garages, I think, opens up more options for public parking at our events. So I think that gives us a lot more options for how we package parking in with individual game sales and for potentially mini plans and things like that. So, you know, looking at, I think the future of how we package those things together, we really haven't done a whole lot of that, simply because we haven't really had a lot of good inventory to work with.
Mhm.
And for us, because like I said, we have our arena right in the middle of student parking lots. I think it gives us inventory that we can work with, because those garages are not, I don't think, going to be used for student parking. They'll be for visitor type parking. Some of them will be faculty, staff levels and things like that. So I think we'll have flexibility for spaces that can be used to be packaged in with individual game ticket sales. And I think that gives us an opportunity to do something that we've never done here before. And that'll be an exciting thing for us to be able to do. And we're starting to see more individual game inventory become available on the ticketing side,
Mhm.
just because of the way our schedules are starting to lay out and things like that. So I think that gives us something to look at. I think the other thing that we noticed in this pandemic, when we started, you talked about going cashless, and we kind of ripped the Band-Aid off, and we went 100% cashless right off the bat. And we were really concerned about that. One of the things we were concerned with is Mississippi has the largest per capita population of unbanked people. And so we really thought that going cashless was going to be a problem for us. but it has not proven to be a problem for us at all. We made prepaid Visa cards available at our souvenir fan shops at the football stadium. We really haven't seen a whole lot of people take advantage of that. So I'm hopeful that that's a sign that maybe all the issues that we're concerned with people having smartphones might not be as big of an issue as we think. So if that's the case, then hopefully moving more of our parking to mobile type delivery may not be as big of an issue as we think. And if that's the case, can we see more of integration with mapping software on phones and things like that we can integrate with delivery of parking and delivery of tickets? That, you know, we most of our fans, the average fan for us comes from 70 miles away. So if we can map people directly to their parking lots, and to Chris's point, park them at a place that's closer to their entry, then I think that would be a really neat service to provide to our fans.
Awesome, thank you. So Chris, obviously ParkHub's a technology solution provider. So how are you looking at technology? What's your vision for the future, and how does ParkHub and parking play a role in that future?
Man, I get my crystal ball out. So we sit around all the time thinking about this and what it's going to look like. I jokingly said, you know, we're all getting replaced by robots at some point, but I do see at some point this being a truly frictionless type of entry, whether it's a LPR, which is license plate recognition, whether it's a toll tag type of entry, which is RFID. Unclear what the technology is going to be down the road. I would suspect at some point be some type of kind of, you know, truly attendantless, you know, type of model. We're talking years down the road, though. I think currently, you know, so during the slowdown, our product and development team had a chance to kind of, you know, take a breath for a second and look at some other products, and we actually released some what we call our ParkHub Safe products, which include a sign that goes into the parking lot for transient kind of daily parking. The guest gets out, goes up to the sign, waves their phone up against the sign. It can do transactions that way. So nothing to touch, you don't have to push any buttons. There's no dirty pay stations, you know, none of that kind of stuff. We have what's called ParkHub Trace, which is a kind of a tokenized icon-based system for building entry or suite entry. So my phone has some icons on it. It matches up with the attendance icons, and that's called Match. Or sorry, that's called ParkHub Match. And ParkHub Trace is an employee health screening tool. So we've introduced some new products into the mix to complement our core product, which is Prime and Suite. So we're thinking about what the Mikes of the world are thinking about. What are the must-have products for right now? And so we're trying to get creative. And in some cases, we were just kind of dusting off our product that was in a developer's head. In other cases, we were actually developing new products or white labeling other products. So hard to say where this all ends up, Craig. You know, it's anyone's best guess. Place your bets now, but I would think at some point it'll be an attendantless, you know, type environment.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, great. So I want to have time for audience Q&A. We've got some questions coming in already. Let's do our second poll question. And then again, while we do that, if you've got a question, we'll ask that and respond to the panelists. So the second one is digital parking passes. Has your organization gone digital with parking passes? Yes or yes? No or not yet, but we plan to. Has your organization gone digital with parking passes? Yes, no, or not yet, but we plan to. So give everyone a minute or so to answer. I always find it super interesting to see these live survey results and take the temperature of the community and kind of share some trending data.
So use is not a hybrid answer, huh?
It's like the yes with multiple S's. This is the next evolution of that. So 42% yes, 28% no, 30% not yet, but we plan to. That's a significant trend, 72% overall. So wow, that's definitely trending in that direction, which is what we're seeing on the ticketing side too, which is great. Okay, so now we're going to open up to Q&A from the audience. We've got some questions already. As a reminder, if you want to type in a question, please use the Q&A tab, which is located in the lower bar on your screen, and just go ahead and type in the questions. I will ask it to the panelists, especially if they're really hard. Here comes some curveballs, guys. So Mike, how is your operation set up in terms of training both the gate staff to scan NFC tickets versus relying on QR codes? Additionally, how are your parking attendants and traffic control being trained to use color-coded phones for direction versus colored hang tags that's easy to see from down the street?
We have all of those folks are now hired by our game operations staff. So we brought those folks internal, and it's a guest services division, and they are trained by our game operations staff and our ticket office staff. So the mobile tickets and we're not using RFIDs right now. We do have some self-scanning pedestals, and we do have handheld scanners at the gates, and they know they're trained to read either the barcodes or the QR codes. And the ones at the gates that have the pedestal scanners, they know that they are to watch the light on the back of the pedestal that's either green or red, and if it's red, then they'll go and assist the fans who are coming in. But they are basically just trained to know that the QR code or the traditional barcode is to be read with the scanners, the handheld scanners. And unless it's we've upgraded our scanners recently, but so unless it's a really sunny day and they're in one of our gate locations that doesn't have a cover, they typically don't have a whole lot of trouble with that. The parking attendants working the gates, we are using just a regular printed home ticket template for those, and so they're not color coded. And the printed home ticket has a pretty large area that our parking lots are numbered. So they have a pretty large area that just lists the lot number on there, and that's how they identify that car is coming into the right lot. But they're also programmed that, just like the gates, that that if they try to enter the wrong lot, it gives them an invalid scan and tells them that they're entering the wrong lot, and then they're redirected to go to the correct lot to come in.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I'm gonna let you tackle this one, although it could be more of a trend for the future. So the question is, for cashless, what do you do when your credit card machine stops working for whatever reason? Has anyone had pushback? Are you only going cashless because of the pandemic, or is it more permanent? From your perspective, do you feel like this is a pandemic trend, or is it a permanent trend, Chris?
Well, I guess the first part of it first. So, hopefully it never goes down. That's the goal. I mean, in our business, in my business, we have to pitch a shutout every single game, every single minute of every single event. So it's designed so that it doesn't stop working. Hopefully, if it does for a second and go offline, you can still conduct transactions offline. It'll just cache the information and then bulk load it up once the system's back online. Very infrequently when that happens, but if it does, the attendant can always do a transaction. So you don't have to worry about some 50-car pilot because the device isn't working. But I think eventually, as I alluded to earlier, there'll be some type of mechanism that will allow entry, either based on your phone, your license plate, the car. There's all kinds of in-dash things that are happening in our business, today. So eventually that'll, that machine that we're talking about today will be something different in terms of how that person gains entry, whether they're paying or whether we're scanning a pass. But ideally, you pick a system that works well, which usually ours does. So.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Chris. Mike, I'm going to pass this one to you. You were talking about being concerned about like a cashless process, and you found that, in Mississippi, you guys had success there. So this question says, for venues that are planning to go cashless in the future, but a large majority of their revenue is drive up day of sales, what are some devices that can be used to make this a cashless transaction? You were talking about prepaid cards, and you had some good experience in general.
Well, I don't know if you mean like physical devices that process those, or, I mean, we actually went out to bid and looked at 3 or 4 different point of sale systems and settled on one that met all the requirements. Obviously we have to jump through a lot of hoops with our campus to make sure that we have the right type of system in place that meets all the requirements for PCI compliance and all these. There's an alphabet soup of things you have to comply with, on campus here, which I'm sure most universities have the same kind of restrictions in place. But we do have a really good one, and I'm happy to help share that information if anybody wants to reach out, and I'll be glad to share that with you. But there are a lot of good systems out there that work really well, and we just went through a new transition to a new concessionaire on campus, and they had to do that with a point of sale system as well. So there are a lot of different ways to go about that. And we also, in addition to the prepaid Visa cards that we have available through our team fan shop, we also have gift cards that you can purchase through our ticket office that you can use at our concession stands and at our ticket office as well. And the reason we didn't go strictly with the gift cards is because if you buy a gift card through our ticket office, it works at any of our venues for tickets or for concessions, but it doesn't work anyplace else. And we didn't want fans to feel like that we were locking them into, hey, if you spend cash at our ticket office to get one of these cards in the short term, because you didn't bring a card to our game, you can only use that card here. You can't take it and use it someplace else. And we wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable that if they bought a prepaid Visa, they could still go and use that Visa at the grocery store, the gas station on the way home, or someplace else. So we did that just for this one season. And once we get through baseball season in this spring, then we will likely not have prepaid visas anymore. We just did that to go through this transition. We were going to move to a partially cashless environment this year anyway. And for us, it was about slippage mostly in the parking lots, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But we just decided because of the pandemic, it was a great time to just go fully cashless, and it's worked out really well for us.
Great, thank you. Chris, I'll let you tackle this one. How does going to an attendant-less or touch-less operation affect the, I think it's ingress of an event and the effectiveness of getting out of the parking garage or facility?
Yeah, so in terms of the, I assume that he or she meant the ingress. So with our system currently, our average transaction times are anywhere from 2 to 3.5 seconds for a credit card and for a contactless payment, even faster for a scan. So it typically doesn't slow down the operation much at all, which is the goal. It's got to be really, really quick.
Right.
On the egress part, we don't control the outbound, the egress side of it. It's always probably sometimes the slowest part because everyone's leaving at the exact same time. With the ingress side, people are staggered. They're coming at different times before the game starts. But our goal is to make sure that our system is as fast as possible, and it is the fastest in the industry today, to make sure there's not a big slowdown, get folks in very quickly. And honestly, a cash transaction can be the longest transaction because if I'm charging $15 and the person doesn't have exact change and there's an exchange back and forth of the cash and the change, it could be a 8 to 12 second transaction. So we're certainly seeing from the digital side of things that a digital transaction is much, much faster, 3-4x faster than a cash transaction.
Okay, great. So Mike, question for you. Does athletics or campus or facilities manage who's got oversight over parking, and how do you work with different groups to make it a seamless experience?
Well, on game days, athletics has control over parking.
Okay.
And we do work closely with campus. And of course, we only have control over lots that have been designated as game day parking lots. The rest of the campus, there are residential student parking lots, there are faculty staff parking lots, there are other lots that are still under the control of the campus. Mm-hmm. So we work really closely with them. And of course, we also work in conjunction with campus police and residents' life over traffic control as well. So there are a lot of different facets of how we move cars around campus, whether they're here to park or whether they're just dropping off to tailgate supplies and moving on or whatever, or whether it's transit. Campus still controls transit on game day as well. So we work closely with them on a number of different transportation initiatives on game days.
Sounds good. Chris, what are you kind of seeing across the landscape? Does athletics typically manage game day parking, or is it a combo and hybrid of campus and other facilities?
I've been at ParkHub for about 4 years, and I've seen a bit of a shift where athletics does control more of it for a variety of different reasons. Mm-hmm. Every school is different, and sometimes athletics and parking don't get along very well. Other times they do. So it's a very interesting dynamic school to school. But I think certainly because athletics is trying to make sure that their guests and their fans and their donors have a good experience, or having more of an involvement in game day parking. So that's been a trend I've seen the last 3 or 4 years.
Sounds great. Okay, one last question. So at Paciolan, we talk a lot about silver linings, and this year has been fraught with challenges. But have there been any silver linings, either personally or professionally, that either of you have experienced this year? Mike, I'm going to start with you.
I think the biggest silver lining is we're actually playing games and we actually have fans in the seats. So I think more than anything, I'll take that silver lining out of here, and I'll take that as a win, and that's my number one win.
Awesome. Chris?
Gosh, personal, I would say that I've got a very well-trained puppy. And if I wasn't here at home as much as I am, may not be as well-trained. So that's probably good on the personal side. Professionally, it's been good for us because we don't have to go reinvent ourselves. We had these products ready to go, for years. So this what's happening right now fits right into our wheelhouse. And I think our type of technology has become more of a must-have versus maybe nice to have, which it was maybe in the past. So we don't have to do much. We don't have to pivot very much. We don't have to go scrap what we're doing and start over. We've got the right products at the right time to help our customers. And that's a good feeling to have from a business standpoint.
Awesome. So we're definitely getting lots of questions about, is this recorded? It is recorded. We will provide a copy of the recording on the Paciolan community site. So I just want to say thank you to Chris and Mike. Really a pleasure catching up with you both and hearing your stories and some trends happening in the business. Also, thank you to all the attendees who spent an hour with us today. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.